What does a man who has everything do when he's at his most powerless? Alexander Sterling, a name synonymous with Wall Street empires and skyline-defining real estate, was worth billions. He could buy companies' influence markets and command the attention of world leaders with a single phone call. But on a rainy Tuesday afternoon, in a greasy spoon diner, smelling of stale coffee and fried onions, all of his power meant nothing. His son, his only son, was shattering in his arms, and the only thing his money could buy was the judgmental stares of strangers. He was just a father failing. And then a voice cut through the noise. A waitress with tired eyes and a name tag that read, Bella, did something no one else dared to. What she did in the next 5 minutes would unravel a web of lies, expose a bitter betrayal, and set in motion a series of events that would irrevocably change both of their lives, proving that the greatest transactions have nothing to do with money and everything to do with the heart. The rain hammering against the panoramic windows of his penthouse was a symphony Alexander Sterling usually enjoyed. It was the sound of the city, his city hunkering down. From his vantage point on the 80th floor of the Sterling Tower, the cars below were a river of red and white lights, insignificant and distant. He was the master of this universe, a titan of finance whose net worth was a subject of speculative articles in Forbes and the Wall Street Journal. He was Alexander Sterling, and he was in complete control. But 2 hours later, and 80 floors down in the cramped, humid confines of a diner called the Corner Spoon in a forgotten part of Brooklyn, he was just a father drowning. The decision to come here was an act of forced normalcy. Leo's therapist, Dr. Albright, had suggested it. Push the boundaries, Alexander. Leo needs to experience the world, not just be shielded from it. It sounded logical in the sterile, quiet environment of the doctor's Upper East Side office. It felt like a fool's errand in the cacophony of reality. His son, 7-year-old Leo, sat in a specially designed wheelchair, his small body tense. Leo was born with a severe form of cerebral palsy. He was non-verbal, his limbs often disobedient, contorting with spastic movements he couldn't control. His world was a frustrating prison of a body that refused to yield to a bright, sharp mind. Communication came through a tablet with an advanced AAC, augmentative and alternative communication app. But today his fingers curled tightly into fists, couldn't even manage that. The trigger was a dropped fork, a simple metallic clatter on the tiled floor that to Leo's overstimulated nervous system was a gunshot. His back arched. A low, guttural moan escaped his lips, the precursor to a full-blown meltdown. The handful of other patrons, a couple of construction workers, an elderly woman nursing a cup of tea, a young couple on a date, all turned to look. Alexander felt the familiar heat rise in his neck. It was a cocktail of shame, defensiveness, and crushing helplessness. "It's okay, buddy. It's okay." He whispered, his voice tight. He tried to soothe Leo, to rub his back, but his touch seemed to make it worse. Leo's moans escalated into a high-pitched, keening wail. His little body thrashed against the restraints of his chair. "Can't you shut that kid up?" one of the construction workers grumbled, not bothering to lower his voice. Alexander's jaw tightened. He wanted to lash out, to pull out his black card and buy the entire diner just to throw them all out. But what good would that do? It wouldn't soothe his screaming child. The manager, a balding man named Trevor, with a perpetually sour expression, approached their table. "Sir, I'm going to have to ask you to. We're leaving." Alexander snapped, already fumbling with the complex buckles on Leo's chair. His hands, usually so steady when signing 9-figure deals, were clumsy and trembling. Leo's cries were frantic now, drawing every eye in the room. They weren't just staring, they were judging. Alexander saw the pity, the annoyance, the quiet thankfulness that it wasn't their child, their life. It was an old, familiar wound. It was the same look he'd seen on his ex-wife Catherine's face before she'd packed her bags and left them unable to handle the burden, as she'd called it. Just as he was about to wrestle the chair towards the door, a soft voice cut through the tension. "Excuse me." Alexander looked up, ready to bite her head off. A waitress stood there. She looked young, maybe early 20s, with dark, compassionate eyes that held not a trace of pity. Her black uniform was faded, and a few stray strands of dark hair had escaped her ponytail. Her name tag, pinned slightly crooked, read Bella. "Maybe," she said, her voice calm and even. "You could try this." She ignored the manager who was sputtering beside her. She didn't look at the other patrons. Her focus was entirely on Leo. She knelt, bringing herself down to his eye level. "Hey there," she said softly, not to Alexander, but to his son. "That was a really loud noise, wasn't it? That can be scary." Leo continued to cry, but the pitch changed, a subtle shift from panic to distress. He was listening. Bella began to hum. It wasn't a recognizable tune, just a low, melodic, repetitive sound. While humming, she slowly, deliberately held out her hand, palm up a few inches from Leo's clenched fist. She didn't try to touch him. She just waited. Alexander stood frozen, watching. This was not in any of Leo's therapy manuals. His army of high-paid specialists with their doctorates and clinical approaches had never done this. They analyzed, they strategized, they implemented programs. They didn't hum. Leo's thrashing lessened, his tear-filled eyes wide with confusion fixated on the girl. His ragged breaths began to even out. Ever so slowly, his own clenched fist began to unfurl one tiny finger at a time. "There you go," Bella whispered, her humming unwavering. "You're okay. You're safe." After what felt like an eternity, Leo's fingers relaxed completely. His hand, still trembling, rested on the arm of his chair. Bella moved her own hand ever so slightly, until her pinky finger gently brushed against his. There was a spark of connection, a silent, profound communion that left Alexander breathless. Leo's crying subsided into shuddering breaths. How did you do that?" Alexander finally managed to ask, his voice hoarse. Bella finally looked at him. A faint, sad smile touched her lips. "My little brother," she said simply. "He has epilepsy. The world can be a loud place for him, too. The humming, it gives his brain something else to focus on. A pattern. It helps ground him." The manager, Trevor, cleared his throat impatiently. "Bella, table 4 needs their check." Bella stood up, her brief moment of magic broken. "Sorry, I should—" "Wait," Alexander said the command in his voice, returning. He looked at this young woman, at the genuine empathy radiating from her. For the first time all afternoon, he didn't feel like a billionaire or a failure. He felt a flicker of hope. He looked at Leo, who was now calm, his eyes still on Bella, a look of quiet wonder on his face. "What's your name?" he asked, though he'd seen the tag. "Isabella. Bella Rossi." "Isabella," Alexander said the name, feeling important on his tongue. "I have a proposition for you. A job. I want you to be my son's caregiver." Bella blinked, stunned into silence. Trevor, the manager, let out a disbelieving snort. The other patrons who had been shamelessly eavesdropping now leaned in further. A caregiver," she stammered. "Sir, I'm a waitress. I'm not a nurse. I have no qualifications." "You have the only qualification that matters," Alexander said, his gaze flicking to his calm, peaceful son. "You see him. You don't see his chair or his condition. You see the little boy inside. I can hire all the nurses and therapists in the world, and they have degrees and certifications that cost a fortune. But I can't buy that." He reached into his wallet, pulled out a business card and a pen. "I'll pay you 5 times what you make here. 10 times. Name your price." He scribbled his private cell number on the back of the card. It was a number known to fewer than a dozen people. Bella stared at the card, then at him, then at Leo. Her mind was reeling. It was an insane, impossible offer, a fairy tale solution to a life of grinding problems she kept hidden behind her tired smile. Her mother Maria and the mountain of medical bills for her failing kidneys. The second-shift cleaning job she worked after the diner. Her long-abandoned dream of becoming a pediatric nurse. Trevor stepped forward. "All right, that's enough. You're harassing my staff. Sir, you need to leave now." "Bella." Alexander said, his voice low and urgent, ignoring Trevor completely. "Please, just think about it. Call me." He pressed the card into her hand. Her fingers felt rough, the skin calloused from work. He finally managed the buckles on Leo's chair, and without another look at the gawking crowd, pushed his son out of the corner spoon and into the rain-swept chaos of the city. Bella was left standing there, the hum of the diner's fluorescent lights suddenly deafening, holding a small piece of cardboard that felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds. It was either a lifeline or a prank. In her world, things like this didn't happen. Not to people like her. But as she looked down at the embossed name, Alexander Sterling, CEO, Sterling Capital, and the hastily scribbled private number, a terrifying, exhilarating thought crossed her mind. What if it was real? The call was the hardest one Bella had ever made. She'd stood in her tiny shared apartment, the Sterling Capital card clutched in her hand, for a full day. Her mother's latest medical bill was on the kitchen table, a stark, red-stamped reminder of their reality. Maria Rossi's kidneys were failing, and the dialysis was a grueling, expensive stopgap. The transplant list was a lottery they couldn't seem to win. This job, this insane offer, wasn't just a better opportunity, it was a potential miracle. When Alexander answered on the first ring, his voice was clipped and professional, a world away from the desperate father in the diner. But the moment she identified herself, his tone softened. "Bella, I'm glad you called." 2 days later, she was walking through the doors of his penthouse. The term apartment felt laughably inadequate. It was a palace in the sky with floors of gleaming marble walls of glass offering a god's-eye view of Manhattan and art on the walls that Bella recognized from textbooks. It was silent, sterile, and intimidating. Her life changed overnight. She quit the diner and the cleaning job. Her salary was more than she'd ever dreamed of, a number that made her feel dizzy. Her first act was to pay off all the outstanding medical bills for her mother. The relief was so profound it made her weep. But the job itself was the real reward. The connection with Leo was immediate and profound. Where others saw limitations, Bella saw potential. She discovered his wicked sense of humor coaxed out through painstaking taps on his AAC device. She learned that he loved the color yellow, the feeling of soft velvet, and the sound of cello music. She brought her own world into his sterile one. She'd bring autumn leaves from Central Park and let him feel their crisp texture. She used her long dormant artistic skills to create textured paintings he could experience through touch. They would sit on the balcony wrapped in blankets, and she'd describe the city below not in terms of buildings and traffic, but as a living, breathing creature. Leo flourished. The frequency of his meltdowns decreased dramatically. There was a new light in his eyes, a spark of engagement that Alexander hadn't seen in years. He started communicating more, typing out full sentences on his tablet. Bella read story. More yellow paint. See dog in park. Alexander watched all of this with a mixture of awe and gratitude. He found himself making excuses to come home from the office early just to watch them. He'd stand in the doorway of Leo's custom-built therapy room, listening to Bella's patient voice and Leo's infrequent happy gurgles. She was bringing life back into his silent home color, into his monochrome world. He started talking to her, not as an employer, but as a person. He learned about her mother's illness, her abandoned dream of nursing school. He saw the weariness that still lingered behind her bright smile and admired her resilience. A fragile, tentative friendship began to form in the quiet moments after Leo was asleep. They'd share a cup of tea, and he would talk about the pressures of his world, and she would talk about the simple joys of hers. For Alexander, it was a breath of fresh air. After his bitter divorce from Catherine, a woman who saw Leo as a social inconvenience and his fortune as her right, he had encased his heart in ice. He was surrounded by people who wanted something from him. Bella, it seemed, wanted only to give, but his world was built on caution and suspicion. It was a fortress, and its chief guardian was his lawyer and longtime confidant, Daniel Harrison. Harrison was a shrewd, impeccably dressed man in his late 50s whose loyalty to Alexander was absolute. He saw his job not just as managing legal affairs, but as protecting Alexander Sterling from the world, and most especially from himself. When he heard about the new caregiver hired on the spot from a diner, alarm bells rang. "Alexander, this is reckless," Harrison said one afternoon in the sterile conference room of Sterling Capital. He slid a file across the polished mahogany table. "I ran a background check. It's my job." Alexander opened the file, his brow furrowing. "And her name is Isabella Rossi, 23 years old, father deceased. Mother Maria Rossi is in stage 4 renal failure. The medical debt is astronomical. We're talking upwards of $300,000 and climbing." Harrison leaned forward, his expression grave. She was working 2 minimum-wage jobs, barely keeping her head above water. There are records of rejected applications for high-interest loans, even a GoFundMe page that raised a pitiful $200. Alexander looked up, a cold knot forming in his stomach. "What are you implying, Daniel?" "I'm not implying anything. I'm stating facts," Harrison said, his tone sharp. "A desperate young woman with crippling debt meets a billionaire with a vulnerable child. She makes a miraculous connection. She's hired for a salary that solves all her problems overnight. Doesn't the optics of that concern you?" "She didn't know who I was," Alexander said. But even as he said it, a sliver of doubt entered his mind. He was one of the most famous businessmen in New York. His face had been on magazine covers. "Are you sure?" Harrison pressed. "It's a 1 in a billion coincidence. The alternative is that it was planned, that she targeted you." The words hit their mark, resonating with the old, painful betrayal of his ex-wife. Catherine had been a master manipulator, playing the part of the loving partner, while her lawyers were already drafting predatory settlement demands. Had he been a fool twice, "She's not like Catherine," Alexander said, more to convince himself than Harrison. "I hope you're right," Harrison said, standing up. "But hope is not a sound investment strategy. Be careful, Alexander. A cornered animal is dangerous, but a desperate person can be even more so." The conversation poisoned the air. Suddenly, Alexander started seeing things through Harrison's cynical lens. Bella's kindness now seemed strategic. Her gentle questions about his day felt like reconnaissance. Her delight in the penthouse, which had once seemed innocent, now looked grasping. He noticed the new, better quality coat she wore. He saw that she'd paid for a private consultation for her mother with a top nephrologist, a consultation he knew cost a small fortune. Of course, he was paying her enough for that. But instead of feeling pleased, he could provide that he felt a prickle of suspicion. She was using his money, solving her problems with his resources. Wasn't that the goal of any gold digger? He grew cold, distant. The easy conversations over tea stopped. His answers to her questions became curt and non-committal. He started communicating through his household manager, leaving notes instead of speaking to her directly. Bella was bewildered and deeply hurt. The warmth that had begun to blossom in the sterile penthouse vanished, replaced by a chilling formality. She felt the invisible walls of Alexander's fortress icing around her again. She didn't understand what she had done wrong. The joy of the job was now tinged with anxiety. She felt like she was on probation, constantly being watched and judged by the man who had, for a fleeting moment, looked at her like she was a miracle. One evening, Leo typed something on his tablet and showed it to her. "Daddy's sad." Bella looked at the words, her heart aching. "I don't know, sweetie," she whispered, stroking his hair. "I think maybe he's just busy." But she knew it was more than that. She could feel Alexander's suspicion like a physical presence. The gilded cage she had so gratefully stepped into was beginning to feel like a prison, and she had no idea who the jailer was or why he was turning the key. The iciness in the sterling penthouse became the new normal. Bella poured all her energy into Leo, creating a bubble of warmth and affection for him that stood in stark contrast to the cold formality she now shared with his father. She missed their conversations, the fleeting moments of connection that had made her feel like more than just an employee. Now she was just the help, albeit incredibly well-paid help. The thought gnawed at her. The trouble when it came started not in the sky-high penthouse, but back on the ground at the corner spoon. Her sudden Cinderella-like departure had become the stuff of legend among the staff. Most were happy for her, but her old manager Trevor was consumed by a bitter jealousy. He saw her good fortune as an affront to his own stagnant life. He started small gossiping to the regulars. "She planned it all, you know," he'd say, wiping down the counter. "Always talking about wanting to meet a rich man. I bet she researched the guy." The whispers might have remained just that, the petty resentment of a small man. But whispers have a way of traveling, and they happened to travel to a private investigator who was on the payroll of a very interested party, Catherine Davenport, Alexander Sterling's ex-wife. Catherine lived in a lavish Connecticut mansion, a prize from her divorce settlement. But her lifestyle was expensive, her investments had soured, and the Sterling money was beginning to run thin. She had always harbored a fantasy that a desperate Alexander, unable to cope with Leo alone, would eventually come crawling back. The news of a young, pretty caregiver forming a deep bond with her son and his father was not just an annoyance, it was a mortal threat to her financial future. Catherine was a woman who did not leave things to chance. Her investigator's report on Bella was thorough. It included the diner gossip from Trevor, the details of Maria Rossi's medical debt, and the GoFundMe page. It was the same information Daniel Harrison had found, but Catherine saw it not as a warning, but as a weapon. She decided a direct confrontation was too risky. Alexander was guarded. She needed to sow the seeds of doubt in a way that seemed undeniable, to present evidence that would align with his deepest fears and insecurities. She needed to make Bella look not just desperate, but predatory and manipulative. Her plan was viciously clever. She used a tech specialist to create a series of fake social media direct messages and emails. They created a fake, now-deleted Instagram profile under a pseudonym. In these fabricated messages, it looked as if Bella were messaging a friend talking about her plan. Fake DM 1. I'm so sick of being broke. Maria's bills are killing me. I need a miracle. A rich one. Fake DM 2. Did you see that article about Alexander Sterling, the tech billionaire, single dad with a disabled kid, lives on the UES? Sometimes he tries to take the kid on normal outings. People say he's completely overwhelmed. Fake DM 3. Supposedly from the day before the diner incident. There's a little diner in Brooklyn he's been to before, according to a gossip blog. The Corner Spoon. So pathetic. But might be worth hanging around. A guy like that seeing a girl being good with his kid. That's the jackpot. To make it more believable, she paid Trevor $2,000 for inside information. He gleefully told her about Bella's brother, the one with epilepsy. Catherine incorporated this detail, twisting it into something monstrous. Fake email to a fake cousin. The key is the kid. I know how to handle situations like this. Remember Marco? A little humming, a soft touch. They fall for it every time. It makes them think you're some kind of saint. The dad won't know what hit him. It was a masterpiece of character assassination, designed to prey on Alexander's history, with her a woman who had also played a part to perfection. Armed with her portfolio of lies, Catherine made her move. She didn't call Alexander. She called Daniel Harrison. She played the part of the concerned mother and ex-wife. Daniel, I know Alexander and I have our issues. She began, her voice dripping with feigned sincerity. But I'll always care about him. And I am terrified for Leo. I've heard about this caregiver. I did some checking for Leo's sake. And what I found, it's worse than I could have imagined. She emailed him the file, the doctored screenshots, the manufactured narrative. Harrison, already primed for suspicion, saw the file and felt a chill. This wasn't just about debt anymore. This looked like a premeditated, cold-blooded scheme. The details about humming, about targeting the diner, it was too specific, too damning to be a coincidence. It confirmed his worst fears. His duty was clear. He requested an immediate, urgent meeting with Alexander. They met that evening in the penthouse library, a room paneled with dark wood and filled with the scent of old leather. Leo was asleep. Bella was in her small adjoining room, reading a nursing textbook she'd bought with her first paycheck, still clinging to her dream. I warned you to be careful, Alexander, Harrison said, his voice grim. It seems I was not careful enough. He laid the printed-out screenshots on the desk. Alexander picked them up. He read the fabricated messages, his face turning from pale to ashen. Each word was a poisoned dart hitting the exact same wound Catherine had carved into his soul years ago. Need a miracle. A rich one. That's the jackpot. They fall for it every time. The humming. She had told him it was because of her brother. The file in his hands claimed it was a calculated trick, a tool of manipulation she had used before. The diner, the place he had thought was a fateful encounter, was reframed as a hunting ground. Her empathy, the one quality he had believed was unimpeachable, was presented as an act. He felt a volcanic rage build within him, followed by a wave of profound self-loathing. He had been a fool, again. He had let another person see his vulnerability, his love for his son, and use it as a weapon against him. He had opened the gates of his fortress and welcomed the enemy in. "Where did you get this?" Alexander's voice was dangerously quiet. "From Catherine," Harrison admitted. "She was—" "I don't care what she was," Alexander seethed, crumpling the papers in his fist. "This confirms everything." He stood up his chair, scraping violently against the floor. The cold distance of the past few weeks solidified into a wall of pure fury. He wasn't just going to for her. He was going to make her understand the gravity of her betrayal. He strode out of the library and down the hall to Bella's room. He didn't knock. He threw the door open. Bella jumped to her feet, her textbook falling to the floor. She saw his face contorted with a rage she had never seen before, and her blood ran cold. "Mr. Sterling, is everything all right? Is it Leo?" "Don't you dare say his name," Alexander snarled, advancing into the room. He threw the crumpled ball of papers at her feet. "Don't you dare pretend to care about him!" Bella flinched, staring at the papers, and then back at his face, her eyes wide with confusion and fear. What is that I don't understand?" "You understand this," he said, his voice dripping with contempt. "You are a manipulative, cold-hearted fraud. The diner, the humming, all of it. A performance. A sick, twisted performance to get your hands on my money." Bella's face went white. "What? No. That's not true." "Who told you that?" "Does it matter?" he shot back. "Your little GoFundMe wasn't paying the bills, was it? So you found a bigger fish, a desperate father. You played your part brilliantly. I'll give you that. You had me fooled. You had my son wrapped around your little finger." Tears welled in Bella's eyes, tears of shock and hurt. "My relationship with Leo is real. I love your son. How can you even think?" "Stop," he commanded, his voice like the crack of a whip. "Just stop lying. I want you out of my house. Now. Pack your things. A security guard will escort you out. You'll receive a final paycheck and a non-disclosure agreement. If you ever try to contact me or my son again, I will use every resource I have to ruin you." The cruelty of his words struck her like a physical blow. He wasn't just firing her. He was erasing her, threatening her, desecrating the one pure and good thing in her life, her bond with Leo. "You can't do this," she pleaded, tears now streaming down her face. "What about Leo? This will crush him. Please, whatever you think I did, don't punish him for it." Her concern for Leo, which should have given him pause, only enraged him further. To his poisoned mind, it was just one last desperate ploy. "You lost the right to speak his name the moment you decided he was your jackpot." He spat, throwing her own fabricated words back at her. He turned and walked out, slamming the door behind him, the sound echoing through the vast, silent penthouse. Bella sank to her knees, sobbing, the crumpled papers of lies resting near her hand. She was back where she started, alone, heartbroken, and with a mountain of problems. But this time was worse. She hadn't just lost a job. She had lost a little boy she had grown to love as her own, and a man she had, against all odds, started to care for. And she had no idea why. Bella's exit was swift and brutal. Two stone-faced security guards watched as she numbly packed her few belongings into a box. She wasn't allowed to say goodbye to Leo. She caught a glimpse of his door closed and silent, and a fresh wave of grief washed over her. She was escorted out through a service elevator, a ghost being exorcised from the palace in the sky. She stepped out into the cold night, the box in her arms feeling like she'd been ripped out of a dream and thrown into a nightmare. Back in her old apartment, the reality crashed down on her. The penthouse felt like a distant memory. She was back in the world of overdue bills and the smell of boiled cabbage from next door. She called her old boss at the corner spoon, swallowing her pride. Trevor, oozing false sympathy, told her the position had been filled. He enjoyed her humiliation. She eventually found another waitressing job at a dreary all-night cafe across town, the Graveyard Shift. The money from Alexander, the final generous paycheck, felt like blood money. She used it to prepay 3 months of her mother's dialysis treatments, and her rent, then put the rest aside, refusing to touch it. It was tainted by his accusation. But the loss of the money was nothing compared to the hole in her heart. Every waking moment was filled with thoughts of Leo. Did he understand why she'd vanished? Did he think she abandoned him? She pictured him tapping her name on his tablet, looking for her, and the image was a physical torment. The bond they shared had been the most genuine thing in her life, and Alexander had called it a fraud. His words echoed in her mind, a cruel mantra of her own perceived failure and deceit. Meanwhile, in the silent penthouse, a different kind of agony was unfolding. Alexander had expected to feel a sense of relief, of righteous anger confirmed. Instead, all he felt was a hollow, gaping emptiness. The life and color Bella had brought were gone. The silence he had once craved now felt oppressive, accusatory. The true toll became apparent in Leo. He had hired a new caregiver, a highly credentialed pediatric nurse named Helen, recommended by the best agency in the city. She was professional, efficient, and utterly incapable of reaching his son. Leo refused to engage. He would turn his face away from her, his small body rigid with rejection. He wouldn't eat. He wouldn't participate in his therapies. The light in his eyes, the one Bella had coaxed out, was extinguished. His only communication was to repeatedly, obsessively tap 2 words on his AAC device: "Where, Bella?" He would show the screen to his father, his eyes wide and pleading. He would show it to the new nurse. He would leave the tablet on his pillow with the message glowing in the dark. It was a constant, heartbreaking question that Alexander could not answer. One afternoon, Alexander came home to the sound of that familiar, keening wail. He ran to Leo's room to find him in the midst of a full-blown meltdown, the worst he'd had in months. Helen, the nurse, was standing helplessly by her professional composure, rattled. "I don't know what happened," she said, her voice shaking. "He just started screaming." Alexander knelt by his son's chair, trying all the old techniques, but nothing worked. In his desperation, he found himself starting to hum the low, melodic, repetitive sound he had heard Bella make. For a fleeting second, Leo's cries hitched. He paused, listening. But when he saw it was his father, not her, his wails of distress intensified, as if this new betrayal was too much to bear. It was in that moment, seeing his son's profound and inconsolable grief, that the first hairline crack appeared in Alexander's wall of certainty. Could a bond that inspired this depth of pain be fake? Could Leo, a child who could not be fooled by social niceties or deceit, be so wrong? He had trusted the evidence. He had trusted the word of his ex-wife, a proven liar over the undeniable improvement and happiness he had witnessed in his own son. The thought was so unsettling, so terrifying in its implications, that he pushed it away. He had to be right. The alternative that he had cruelly and unjustly destroyed an innocent young woman and broken his own son's heart in the process was unthinkable. A few days later, Daniel Harrison came to the penthouse to finalize the NDA paperwork. He found Alexander in his study, staring out at the city, a glass of untouched whiskey on his desk. "The house feels like a tomb," Alexander said without turning around. "It takes time." Harrison replied, though he too was unsettled. He had seen the reports from the new nurse. He knew Leo was regressing badly. "He keeps asking for her Daniel." Alexander's voice was heavy with a pain he couldn't hide. "Every single day. He's fading. It's like she took the sun with her." "Children are resilient." Harrison offered the words, sounding hollow even to himself. "Are they?" Alexander finally turned his eyes red-rimmed and exhausted. I saw the evidence. It was damning. But what I'm seeing from my son, it's a different kind of evidence. It's not on paper. It's real." He ran a hand over his face. "I need to be sure. 100% sure." Harrison's professional pride was stung. The evidence was conclusive. Was it? Alexander challenged a new fire in his eyes. Or was it just a story that I was all too ready to believe because of Catherine? You and I, we're men who deal in facts in due diligence. We analyze balance sheets and market trends down to the decimal point. But on this, I just looked at a few screenshots and my own bitter past, and I blew up a young woman's life. I blew up my son's life. He leaned forward, his voice dropping to an intense, urgent whisper. I want you to investigate it again, and not just a background check. I want you to investigate the evidence itself. Where did those DMs come from? The emails, I want to know who created that Instagram profile. I want to see IP addresses, server logs, everything. Don't tell me it's impossible, Daniel. We have the resources. Dig. Dig until you hit bedrock. I have to know the truth. Not Catherine's truth. The real truth. Harrison looked at the desperation on his friend's face, at the pain that was clearly about more than just a personnel issue. His own confidence was shaken. He had taken Catherine's information at face value, colored by his own protective instincts for Alexander. He hadn't questioned the source, only the content. It was an uncharacteristic oversight, and it was now torpedoing the man he was sworn to protect. All right, Alexander. Harrison said, his voice firming with new resolve. I'll do it. I'll hire the best digital forensics team in the country. We'll find bedrock. As Harrison left, Alexander walked to Leo's room. His son was asleep, his face pale and tear-streaked. His tablet lay on the nightstand, its screen glowing faintly. On it were the same two words, where Bella Alexander picked it up his thumb, hovering over the screen. He felt a profound sense of dread, a premonition that the bedrock Daniel was about to find would not be a foundation, but the floor of a chasm, and that he was already in free fall. Daniel Harrison, driven by his own sense of professional failure and loyalty to his friend, moved with the swift, brutal efficiency of a man correcting a grave error. He didn't just investigate. He waged a war on the lie. He unleashed a team of digital forensics experts, the kind of cyber sleuths who chase ghosts for governments, giving them a simple directive, find bedrock. The results came back within 48 hours, and they were not a foundation, but a landmine. They were irrefutable. The damning Instagram profile, which had painted Bella as a predatory gold digger, planning her moves, was the first domino to fall. Its creation timestamp was immutable, proving the account had been made a week after Bella's hiring its posts, cleverly and maliciously backdated to create a false narrative. Next, the vitriolic emails. Though cloaked in layers of anonymizing proxies designed to be untraceable, they were no match for Harrison's team. One by one, the layers were peeled back, revealing a single origin point: the encrypted private network of a sprawling mansion in Greenwich, Connecticut. It was Catherine Davenport's home. The motive which had seemed so obvious before was now reframed. A deep dive into Catherine's finances revealed she wasn't just wealthy. She was on the verge of ruin her lavish lifestyle, a facade propped up by dwindling funds and bad investments. Bella hadn't been a threat to her past. She was a roadblock to Catherine's desperate hope for a future financial rescue. The final, most cynical piece of the puzzle was the diner manager, Trevor. Financial records subpoenaed with surgical speed showed 2 cash transfers from an offshore account, linked directly to Catherine. Faced with irrefutable proof of bribery and the threat of perjury, Trevor confessed immediately to Harrison's legal team. He admitted he'd been paid for information for dirt. He told them how he'd passed along personal details about Bella, most damningly. The poignant story of how she would hum to calm herself, a habit born from years of caring for her epileptic younger brother. Catherine hadn't just invented a lie. She had taken a piece of Bella's authentic soul, a truth born of love, and had expertly poisoned it. Harrison brought the file to the penthouse that evening. He found Alexander in the library, the very room where he had passed his terrible, unjust sentence. Without preamble, Harrison laid out the evidence on the polished desk. He didn't soften the blow. He presented the facts clinically: the fraudulent timestamps, the IP address, the money trail, and the manager's pathetic confession. Alexander listened in absolute, deathly silence. The fortress of his righteous anger, which had protected him for weeks, did not just crack. It disintegrated into dust. In its place, a vacuum of pure, nauseating guilt opened up, threatening to swallow him whole. He saw the sequence of events with horrifying clarity. He wasn't a righteous protector of his son. He had been a puppet, and his bitter, manipulative ex-wife had pulled the strings with masterful cruelty. Every venomous word he had spoken to Bella that night replayed in his mind, each one now a testament to his own blindness. He had looked at genuine kindness, at a miracle of empathy, and because he was so conditioned by his own past scars, he had called it a lie. His gaze fell upon a photograph of Leo on his desk. The boy's smile, bright and full of life, a smile he hadn't seen in weeks. He knew. Alexander whispered, his voice cracking with the force of his self-loathing. My son who cannot be deceived. He knew she was good. He tried to tell me, and I wouldn't listen. The paralysis of regret suddenly gave way to a frantic, urgent need for action. He stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. Find her, Daniel, he commanded, his voice raw with an energy that was part desperation, part resolve. I don't care what it takes or what it costs. Find her now. As Harrison was already pulling out his phone, Alexander's mind raced, trying to find a way to begin to atone. And get Dr. Alistair Evans on the phone, the top nephrologist. I want him on a plane to New York to see a new patient, Maria Rossi. Tell him money is no object. He strode from the library, a man on a singular mission. He paused at Leo's bedroom door, watching his son's small, fitful sleep. The weight of his mistake was crushing. I am so sorry, he whispered into the quiet room. Daddy made a terrible, terrible mistake. I'm going to fix it. He now faced the most difficult transaction of his life, seeking forgiveness from the innocent woman whose life he had so carelessly and cruelly shattered. The Starlight Cafe was an island of harsh, buzzing light in the deep ocean of 2 a.m. New York. It smelled of stale, grease-burnt coffee and quiet desperation, a haven for the city's ghosts. Alexander Sterling, stripped of his bespoke armor and dressed in simple dark clothes, was an alien here, a creature from another world. His presence drew a few curious glances, but the patrons were too lost in their own worlds to care for long. He saw her behind the counter, and the sight was a physical blow. The vibrant, compassionate light he remembered in her eyes had been dimmed to a mere pilot light of exhaustion. She moved with a listless efficiency that tore at his conscience. This vacant-eyed woman was his creation, the living embodiment of his catastrophic failure of judgment. He took a seat in a cracked vinyl booth, the kind that was perpetually sticky. It took her a full minute to notice him. When she approached pad in hand, her gaze was fixed on the tabletop. "Can I help you?" she asked, her voice flat, tired. "Bella." Her name spoken in his voice was a quiet grenade in the weary hum of the cafe. Her head snapped up. Her face became a canvas of conflicting emotions, painted in rapid succession. Disbelief gave way to fear, which hardened instantly into a wall of guarded, angry pain. She took an involuntary step back, as if he were a ghost she had long tried to exorcise. "What are you doing here?" she whispered, her hands tightening on the small notepad until her knuckles were white. "I came to apologize," he said, and his voice, usually so full of command, was quiet and raw. "I know that word is not nearly enough for what I did. Please, can you give me 5 minutes?" Her eyes darted to her boss, a hulking man who was watching them with open suspicion from the kitchen pass-through. With a short, reluctant nod, she slid into the booth opposite him, crossing her arms over her chest. It was not an invitation. It was a barricade. 5 minutes, she stated, her voice as cold as the city street outside. He leaned forward, forcing himself to hold her hurt-filled gaze. "Everything I said to you that night was a lie." He began the words, tasting like ash in his mouth. "It was a vicious, calculated fabrication by my ex-wife, Catherine. She faked evidence. She paid off your old manager at the diner to get details about your life, about your brother, Bella." The name felt sacred and profane on his lips. "She took the story of your humming and twisted it into a weapon. And I was a fool. I was a coward, so wounded by my own past that I let her poison me against the one good, pure thing that had entered my life. I aimed all my own brokenness at you. It was a monstrous act, and I am shattered by the damage I've caused." Bella listened in rigid silence, but he saw a flicker of something in her eyes. It was the terrible vindication of understanding the source of her pain. "She used my brother." She whispered, the horror of it dawning on her. "Yes," he confirmed, his heart aching. "There is no excuse for what I did. I didn't just cost you a job. I assaulted your character. I desecrated your kindness. And in doing so, I broke my own son." At the mention of Leo, the icy dam of her composure finally broke. A single tear escaped and traced a path down her cheek. "How is he?" The question was thick with an emotion she had tried so hard to suppress. "He's lost," Alexander confessed, his own voice cracking. "The light you gave him is gone. He asks for you, Bella. Every single day he types your name. He's fading, and it's my fault. He needs you." "I know," he added quickly, raising a hand. "I know I have no right to ask you for anything. I don't deserve a second chance. but I am begging you to give him one." He slid a folder across the sticky table. It was not a file of lies, but one of reparations. She opened it with trembling fingers. It was not a contract. It was a life raft. A letter of acceptance and a fully funded scholarship to her dream nursing program at Johns Hopkins. The official charter for a new multi-million-dollar non-profit, the Leo and Bella Foundation for Children with Special Needs, naming her as future co-director. And finally, a complete medical file for her mother, Maria Rossi, detailing a transplant evaluation scheduled for the following day with Dr. Alistair Evans, the world's leading specialist, who was already on a plane. Bella stared at the documents, at the sheer, overwhelming scale of his atonement. It was too much to process. It was a fantasy laid out on a greasy cafe table. "I never wanted your money," she said, her voice choked with a mix of awe and renewed hurt. "I know," he said softly. "This isn't a transaction. It's restitution. It's the only way I know how to begin to repair what I destroyed." Just then his phone vibrated on the table. A text message from Harrison. Alexander's hand shook as he turned the screen for her to see. It was a photo taken moments ago. Leo was sitting up in his bed, his small face etched with a familiar sadness. In his hands he held his tablet, and on its glowing screen were two simple words that pierced through Bella's heart like a shard of glass. "Where Bella." That was it. The papers were one thing, an abstract and overwhelming gesture. But the image of that sweet, lonely boy, his silent, desperate plea reaching out to her from across the city, that was real. That was the truth that mattered more than all the lies and all the money in the world. Their bond wasn't something that could be bought or fabricated. It was the truest thing she had ever known. Tears now streamed down her face. She pushed the folder back toward him. "Take me to him," she whispered, her voice trembling but firm. Relief so powerful and profound, it almost buckled him, washed over Alexander. He stood ready to lead her away. She held up a hand, walked to the counter, and placed her stained apron down. She didn't offer her boss an explanation, nor did he ask for one. She simply turned her back on the Starlight Cafe and walked out into the pre-dawn chill, leaving her old life behind for the second and final time. The ride to the penthouse was a blur of silent, heavy anticipation. When they arrived, the first blush of dawn was painting the sky. At the door to Leo's room, Alexander stopped. He had no place in this reunion. This was a sacred space he had desecrated. "I'll wait out here," he murmured. Bella pushed the door open. Leo was on his bed, listlessly pushing a wooden block. He looked up, and his entire body went still. He stared, his mind struggling to reconcile the vision before him with the ache of her absence. "Hey there, sweetie," Bella whispered, her voice breaking. A slow, brilliant smile spread across Leo's face, a sunrise after a long and starless night. A joyful gurgling sound erupted from his throat, a sound of pure, unadulterated happiness. He lifted his arms, his uncooperative muscles straining with the sheer force of his will reaching for her. She rushed to his side and gathered him into a gentle hug, burying her face in his hair as sobs of relief and sorrow shook her body. "I'm here," she cried softly. "I'm so sorry I was gone. I'm here now." Leo squeezed her back with all his might. He didn't need his tablet to communicate. His unrestrained joy, his absolute forgiveness, filled the vast, sterile room with a warmth it had not known since she'd left. From the hallway, Alexander Sterling, the titan of industry, leaned his head against the cool wood of the door and listened to the sounds of his son's happiness. He wept silently, not in sorrow, but in profound, humbling gratitude. He had shattered a trust more valuable than his entire fortune. The work of rebuilding it piece by piece had just begun. But for the first time in an eternity, listening to the light returning to his son's world, his gilded cage finally felt like a home. Alexander Sterling learned the most valuable lesson of his life that day. He learned that true wealth isn't measured by stock portfolios or the height of the buildings you own, but by the trust you earn and the compassion you show. His journey wasn't just about righting a wrong. It was about tearing down the walls around his own heart to truly see the people in front of him. For Bella, it was a testament to her unbreakable spirit, proving that integrity and kindness are superpowers that can shine in the darkest of places. Their story forged in a misunderstanding and rebuilt on a foundation of truth and forgiveness is a powerful reminder that we are all just one act of kindness, one moment of true connection away from changing a life forever. If this story touched your heart and reminded you of the power of empathy, please take a moment to like this video and share it with someone who might need to hear it. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel and click the notification bell for more real-life dramas that explore the depths of the human heart. What did you think of Alexander's final actions? Let us know in the comments below.